Honey, I found a new refrigerator for $25,000. Those were the words I heard come out of my daughter-in-law, Brenda's, mouth that afternoon. She was sitting on the sofa in my own living room, with a glossy catalogue in her hands, showing it to my son, Robert, as if it were the discovery of the century. She smiled that smile I knew all too well. That smile that appeared every time she wanted something expensive. Every time she needed to convince him to spend money they didn't have. My son nodded. He nodded his head like an obedient child, as if $25,000 were 25 cents, as if that money fell from the sky, as if it weren't his mother's money they were planning to spend. I was in the kitchen making coffee. I could see them from there. I could hear every word. Brenda kept talking, excited, pointing at the photos in the catalogue. She talked about smart features, European design, cutting-edge technology, and I only thought about how many hours of work those $25,000 represented. How many turkeys, how much sewing, how many swollen knees scrubbing other people's floors. Then I saw Robert reach into my purse. My purse was hanging on the dining chair. He did it without asking permission, without even looking over to where I was, as if that purse were his, as if everything that was mine belonged to him. But he didn't find what he was looking for. Instead of my card, he pulled out some folded documents. He opened them slowly, and in that moment, I saw his face change. He turned pale, white as a sheet. His hands started to tremble slightly. He looked at Brenda with wide eyes and said in a broken voice, "Honey, it says here that the condo is still in my mother's name." The silence that followed was heavy. Brenda stopped smiling. She snatched the papers from his hands and read them quickly. Her expression changed too. From excitement, it turned to confusion, and from confusion, it turned to something I knew very well. Disappointment, frustration, anger. I kept preparing the coffee as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't heard, as if I hadn't seen. But inside, something had broken. Something that had been cracking for years finally split in two. That night. I woke up at 3 in the morning. It wasn't because of a nightmare. It was because I heard voices. Voices coming from the living room. Voices whispering. Voices talking about me as if I didn't exist. I stayed still in my bed. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't make a sound. I just listened. I listened to every word that came out of my son's and my daughter-in-law's mouths. Every plan they were hatching, every lie they were building. Brenda spoke quickly. She said I had a lot of money saved, that she had seen it on my bank statements, that it was money I wasn't using, that it was just sitting there for no purpose, that they needed it more than I did, that they had debts, that they had plans, that they had a life ahead of them. Robert listened in silence. I expected him to say something, to stop her, to say that it was wrong, that I was his mother, that the money was mine, that I had earned it with my own effort. But he didn't say any of that. He said yes. He said it was true. He said I had too much money for a woman my age, that I didn't need it anymore, that I no longer had big expenses, that it was better if they managed it, that it was for my own good, for my own good. Those 2 words hurt more than anything else, because they revealed something I didn't want to accept, that my son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as an obstacle, as someone who was in the way of his plans, as someone to take advantage of before it was too late. Brenda kept talking. She said they would try again first thing in the morning, that they would look for my card, that they would go to the bank, that they would take out what they needed, that afterward they would convince me that it had been my idea, that I was old and forgetful, that I wouldn't even notice. I heard footsteps. They moved away toward their bedroom, and I stayed there, alone in the darkness, with my heart racing and my mind more awake than ever. I thought about everything, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every plate of food that I didn't taste so my son could eat, every dollar I saved by denying myself so he could have what he needed, every dream I let go of so he could pursue his. And now he was here, in my own house, planning to steal from me, planning to trick me, planning to treat me as if I were a fool who wouldn't notice anything. But something happened in that moment, something I didn't expect myself. I didn't feel like crying, I didn't feel like screaming, I didn't feel like confronting them. I felt something else. I felt clarity, I felt determination, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt that the moment had come to stop being the mother who gives everything and receives nothing. The moment had come to be Grace Miller, the woman who raised a home alone, the woman who survived poverty, the woman who never gave up on anything or anyone. And if my own son thought he could trick me, he was about to receive the most important lesson of his life. I closed my eyes and smiled in the darkness, because I knew something they didn't. That a 64-year-old woman is not weak. She is wise. And that wisdom can be more powerful than any plan. Tomorrow would be another day. A day in which I was not going to be the victim of this story. I was going to be the one who wrote the ending. And that ending was not going to be the one they expected. The days before that night had been strange. Now that I thought about it clearly, everything made sense. Every gesture, every word, every forced smile. It had all been part of a plan that I didn't want to see. Because when you love someone, especially when it's your son, you prefer to believe the best. You prefer to ignore the signs. You prefer to think you're imagining things. But I wasn't imagining anything. It all began 3 months ago, when Robert and Brenda moved in with me. They said it was temporary, that they were going through financial difficulties, that they needed to save up to buy their own house, that it would only be for a few months. I opened my doors to them without thinking twice. He was my son. He was my blood. And a mother always has room for her son. At first, everything seemed normal. Brenda helped me with the cooking. Robert fixed things around the house that I couldn't fix alone. We ate dinner together. We watched television together. I felt accompanied after so many years of solitude. After my husband died, this house had become too silent, too empty. Having them here made me feel alive again. But little by little, things started to change. The questions began. Questions that at first seemed innocent, casual, but that over time became more and more specific, more and more insistent. Brenda was the first. One day we were drinking coffee in the kitchen and she asked me if I had savings. I told her yes, that I had worked all my life and had managed to put something away. She smiled and told me that was good, that it was important to have security at my age, that many older women weren't so lucky. Then she asked me where I kept that money. I told her at the bank. She nodded and asked if I kept everything in one account or if I had split it up. I told her I had a savings account where I kept most of it. She smiled again and told me that was very smart of me, that I was a cautious woman. At the time, I didn't think anything bad. I thought she was just making conversation, that she was just curious. But now, remembering that conversation, I realized that it had been the first step, the first stone on a path that would lead me directly to that morning when I heard them planning to rob me. Days later, Robert also started with the questions. He asked me approximately how much money I had. I told him it was none of his business. He laughed and told me he just wanted to know if I was okay, if I had enough to live comfortably, if I needed help with anything. I told him I was perfectly fine, that I had worked hard all my life precisely so as not to depend on anyone in my old age. He remained silent, but I saw something in his eyes, something I didn't like, a shadow, a disquiet, something that shouldn't be there when a son looks at his mother. Weeks passed, and both of their behaviors became stranger. Brenda started being too kind, too attentive. She brought me tea without me asking. She asked how I had slept. She told me I looked tired, that I should rest more, that she would take care of everything in the house. At first, I liked it. I thought she was finally learning to care for me, that she was finally appreciating everything I had done for them. But then I started to notice something, that her kindness was always accompanied by questions. Questions about my health, about my memory, about whether I forgot things, about whether I felt confused sometimes. One day she told me her aunt had started forgetting things at my age, that she was later diagnosed with dementia, that it was important to watch for the signs. I told her my memory was perfect, that I didn't forget anything, that I knew exactly where everything was and how much money I had in the bank. She smiled, but that smile didn't reach her eyes. Robert also changed the way he spoke to me. He started treating me as if I were fragile, as if I were stupid. He explained simple things to me as if I couldn't understand them. He spoke to me slowly. He repeated things twice. And when I told him I had understood perfectly the first time, he laughed and told me he just wanted to make sure. One day I heard them talking in their room. I was walking past the hallway and the door was ajar. Brenda was telling Robert that I had a lot of money saved and wasn't using it for anything, that the money could be helping them, that I was already old and didn't need so much, that when I died, that money was going to be Robert's anyway, so why not use it now when they needed it? Robert didn't say no. He didn't stop her. He didn't defend his mother. He only said they had to think it through, that they couldn't just take my money, that I would notice. Brenda laughed and told him I wouldn't notice anything if they did it right, that they just had to be smart, that they just had to wait for the right moment. I moved away from that door with a heavy heart, but I still didn't want to believe it. I still wanted to think I had misheard, that they were talking about something else, that my son would never be capable of such a thing. But the signs kept appearing. One afternoon I found Brenda looking through my papers in my bedroom. When I asked her what she was doing, she jumped and told me she was looking for a recipe I had promised her. I told her my recipes were in the kitchen, not my room. She laughed nervously and left quickly. Another night, Robert asked me if I had made a will. I asked him why he wanted to know that. He said he was just curious, that he wanted to know if I had everything in order. I told him my affairs were perfectly in order, and that it wasn't something we needed to talk about now. He insisted. He told me it was important, that I should share that information with him, that he was my only son and had the right to know. The right to know. Those words sounded like an alarm to me, because he wasn't asking out of love. He was asking out of interest. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was worried about my inheritance. The days kept passing, and I felt more and more uncomfortable in my own house. I felt like I was being watched, that they were waiting for something, that they were planning something. But I still didn't know exactly what, until that afternoon with the refrigerator. That afternoon when Brenda pulled out that ridiculous catalogue and talked about $25,000 as if it were nothing. That afternoon when my son reached into my purse without permission. That afternoon when he found the condo documents and realized it was still in my name. And that early morning when I heard them planning to rob me. Now everything made sense, every question, every gesture, every fake smile. It had all been part of a plan to convince me that I was old and foolish, to make me believe I needed their help. to take control of my money and my life. But they were wrong, because I wasn't old and foolish, I was old and wise. And there was a huge difference between those two things. I got out of bed as the sun began to rise. I dressed slowly. I combed my hair in front of the mirror. I looked myself in the eyes. And I made a promise to myself. A promise I was going to keep no matter how much it hurt. I wasn't going to let them steal from me. I wasn't going to let them treat me like a fool. I wasn't going to let my own son disrespect me that way. Because at this age, one learns something fundamental. That silence is not weakness, that calmness is not ignorance, and that a woman who has survived 64 years in this world knows exactly how to protect herself, even when the danger comes from her own blood. That morning, I had breakfast alone. Robert and Brenda were still sleeping, or at least, it seemed that way. I made my coffee like every morning. I sliced a piece of toast. I spread a little butter. I sat in my usual spot, next to the window, where the sunlight comes in. But nothing was as usual, because now I knew the truth. I knew my son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as a source of money, as a bank he could turn to whenever he wanted, as a naive old woman who wouldn't notice anything. While drinking my coffee, I remembered all the times I worked until I was exhausted, all the times I sewed other people's clothes until my fingers bled, all the times I cleaned houses for people who treated me as if I were invisible, all the times I sold baked goods under the burning sun of the town square, sweating with swollen legs, just so I could pay for Robert's school. I remembered the times I ate only beans so he could eat meat, the times I wore old, patched clothes so he could have new ones, the times I denied myself small pleasures so he could have everything he needed, and some things he didn't need, but that I wanted to give him anyway, because he was my son, because I loved him more than my own life. And now that son was planning to steal from me. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Brenda appeared in the kitchen. She was wearing an expensive robe that I knew she had bought with the credit card that Robert couldn't pay. She greeted me with a smile that now seemed false, artificial, calculated. "Good morning, mother-in-law. You got up early today," I replied with kindness, because I also knew how to pretend. I also knew how to smile when inside I felt something else. I asked her if she had slept well. She said yes. She poured herself coffee. She sat across from me and started talking. She talked about the refrigerator again. She said she had been thinking about it all night, that it really was a good investment, that a refrigerator of that quality would last many years, that it would be worth spending the money now so as not to have to buy another one later, that besides, she knew I had enough money saved and that it wouldn't be a problem for me. I looked at her while she spoke. I looked at her intently, and I realized something. Brenda didn't just want my money. Brenda hated me. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she gripped the coffee cup, in the tension of her jaw. She hated me because I was Robert's mother, because I had been there first, because my son loved me, or at least he had loved me once, and she couldn't stand it. I told her that $25,000 was a lot of money, that I wasn't sure it was necessary to spend so much on a refrigerator, that the one we had worked perfectly fine. She stopped smiling. Her expression changed. She became serious, almost annoyed. "You just don't understand, mother-in-law. Things have changed. Technology has advanced. That old refrigerator consumes a lot of electricity. In the long run, it's costing you more money. A new refrigerator would be more efficient. It would save you money on the electric bill." I knew she was lying. I knew she didn't care about the electric bill. I knew the only thing she cared about was my money, but I didn't say anything. I just nodded. I just drank my coffee. I just kept listening. Robert appeared a few minutes later. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes. He sat down next to Brenda, and she immediately started talking to him about the refrigerator again. He looked at me. He looked at me with those eyes I had known since he was a child. Those eyes that now seemed different, harder, colder, more distant. "Mum, Brenda is right. We should buy that refrigerator. I know it's expensive, but you have the money. And we live here too. It would be an investment for everyone." An investment for everyone. How easy it was for him to talk about my money as if it belonged to everyone, as if I hadn't earned it alone, as if he had contributed even $1 of that money, as if he had any right to what I had built with my own effort. I told him I would think about it, that I needed to check my accounts, that I needed to see if I could really spend that amount. Brenda sighed impatiently. Robert pressed his lips together, but they didn't say anything else. They got up from the table and went to their room. I stayed there, sitting, finishing my coffee, looking out the window. Outside, the day was beautiful. The sky was clear. The birds were singing. Life went on as usual. But inside this house, something had broken. Something that would never be the same again. The following days were unbearable. Brenda kept insisting on the refrigerator. Every morning, every afternoon, every night. She always found a way to bring up the subject, to remind me that I had the money, to make me feel as if I was selfish for not wanting to spend it on something they wanted. Robert also began to pressure me. He told me I was too attached to money, that I didn't know how to enjoy life. What good was it to have so much money saved if I didn't use it? That when I died, I wouldn't be able to take that money to the grave. When I died. Those words chilled my blood, because they revealed something terrible. That my son was already waiting for my death. That he was already planning what to do with my money when I was no longer around. That I was no longer a person to him. I was just an obstacle between him and his inheritance. One afternoon, while I was in my room, I heard a knock on the front door. I went out and saw it was a salesman, a young man in a uniform from some appliance store. He brought brochures, he brought catalogues, and Brenda had called him. The man entered the living room and began to show me refrigerators, extremely expensive models, with digital screens, with water dispensers, with special compartments for wine. Things I had never needed in my life. Things nobody really needs. Brenda was by my side, pointing at the photos, saying how wonderful they were. Robert was on the other side, nodding at everything she said. And I was in the middle, feeling cornered, feeling pressured, feeling as if I had no choice. The salesman asked me which one I liked best. I told him none of them, that I was not interested in buying a new refrigerator. Brenda turned red. Robert clenched his fists. The salesman became uncomfortable and left quickly. When the door closed, Brenda exploded. She told me I was a cheapskate, that I didn't know how to live, that I had the money but didn't want to use it, that I was selfish, that I only thought about myself, that I didn't care about them, that I didn't care about the family. Robert didn't stop her. He didn't defend me. He just stood there, looking at me with resentment, as if I were the villain of the story, as if I were the one doing something wrong. I went to my room without saying anything. I closed the door. I sat on my bed. And for the first time in many days, I felt like crying. Not for them, but for myself. For everything I had lost. For the illusion of having a family. For the love of a son that no longer existed. But I didn't cry, because something inside me had changed. Something had hardened. I had realized that I couldn't continue to be the self-sacrificing mother who gives everything and receives nothing in return. I had to be something else. I had to be a woman who protects herself. That night, when everyone was asleep, I took out my bank papers. I checked my statements. I counted how much money I had. And I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to give them a single dollar. I wasn't going to let them steal from me. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me. I was going to protect what was mine. And if that meant losing my son, then so be it. Because I had already lost him anyway. The son I knew no longer existed. What was left was a man I didn't recognize. A man who had chosen money over his own mother. And if I had learned anything in 64 years of life, it was this: that true love doesn't ask. It doesn't demand. It doesn't manipulate. And when someone treats you like that, no matter who they are, you have to know how to say no, even if that someone is your own son. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't had in weeks. I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to yell at them. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. I was going to act in silence. I was going to protect what was mine in the only smart way, without drama, without scandal, just with strategy. I dressed carefully. I chose my most formal clothes, a simple but elegant dress. I combed my hair. I put on the earrings my husband gave me when we celebrated 20 years of marriage. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw the woman I really was. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. And survivors know how to take care of themselves. I left my room and went straight to the kitchen. Robert and Brenda were still sleeping. Perfect. I didn't want explanation. I didn't want questions. I made a quick coffee. I took my purse. I checked that I had my identification and my documents, and I left the house without making a sound. The bank opened at 9 in the morning. I arrived 10 minutes early. I sat on the bench outside to wait. The morning sun was warm. The street was quiet. Everything seemed normal. But I knew nothing would ever be normal after that day. When they opened the doors, I was the first to enter. I went directly to the customer service desk. A young woman greeted me with a smile. I told her I needed to speak with an account executive, that it was urgent. She asked me to wait a moment. 5 minutes later, a man about 40 years old called me into his office. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. He offered me a seat. He offered me water. He asked me how he could help. And I told him the truth, the whole truth. I told him that my son and my daughter-in-law were planning to rob me, that they had tried to take my card without my permission, that they were pressuring me to spend my money on unnecessary things, that I was afraid they would try to access my account somehow, that I needed to protect myself. Mr. Harrison listened to me carefully. He didn't judge me. He didn't make me feel like I was overreacting. He just took notes. He nodded and told me he understood perfectly, that unfortunately he had seen similar cases many times, that I had done well to come in. He explained the options I had. I could change all my access codes. I could cancel my current card and request a new one. I could add security alerts to my account to notify me of any movement. I could even open a new account at another bank and transfer most of my money there. I told him I wanted to do all of that, everything necessary to protect myself. He smiled with understanding and began the paperwork. First, we changed all my passwords, my card's PIN, the security answers, everything. Then we cancelled my old card and requested a new one that would arrive at the branch in 3 days. Not at my house. We activated text message alerts for any transaction greater than $100, and we configured the account so that any withdrawal greater than $1,000 would require my physical presence at the bank with identification. But that wasn't enough for me. I asked Mr. Harrison if we could do something else. Something that would truly ensure no one could touch my money without my authorization. He thought for a moment and then suggested something that seemed perfect. We could create a secondary account with just $1,000, a decoy account. If someone managed to access my information, they would only see that account. The main account, with all my real savings, would remain invisible in normal inquiries. Only I could access it with a special code. I agreed immediately. Mr. Harrison worked on his computer for almost an hour. He made calls. He filled out forms. He verified my identity 3 times. And finally, he handed me all the new documents. He explained that my money was now safer than ever, that even if someone stole my card, they couldn't do anything with it because the PIN was new, that even if someone managed to get into my online account, they would only see the $1,000 in the secondary account, that my true savings were protected in an account that no one would know existed. I thanked him. I shook his hand. And I walked out of that bank feeling stronger than I had felt in months. I had taken control. I had acted intelligently. I had protected what was mine without needing to yell or fight. I walked down the street back home. I stopped at a bakery and bought some donuts. I stopped at the market and bought fresh flowers. I acted as if nothing had happened, as if I had gone out to run normal errands, because I didn't want them to suspect anything. Not yet. When I arrived home, Robert and Brenda were already awake. They were in the living room. When they saw me come in with the bags, Brenda asked me where I had been. I told her I had gone to buy bread. She looked at the bags suspiciously, but didn't say anything else. I went to the kitchen and put away the bread. I put the flowers in a vase with water. I made fresh coffee. Everything normal. Everything quiet. As if my heart wasn't beating fast. As if I hadn't just taken the most important step of my life. That afternoon, Brenda brought up the refrigerator again. But this time her tone was different, more urgent, more desperate. She told me the salesman had called, that there was a special offer, that if we bought that week, they would give us a discount of 10%, that only 2 units were left, that we had to decide now. I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel the need to please her. I only felt a deep calm, an absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. I told her no, that I wasn't going to buy that refrigerator, that the one we had worked fine, that I didn't see the need to spend that amount of money, that my decision was final. Brenda turned pale. Robert, who was next to her, clenched his jaw. I felt the tension in the air, but I didn't move. I didn't change my expression. I just looked at them calmly and waited to see what they would do. Brenda got up abruptly from the sofa. She muttered something under her breath and went to her room with heavy steps. Robert stayed there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. There was surprise. There was anger. There was something else, something that looked like fear. "Mum, we need to talk." I told him there was nothing to talk about, that I had made a decision and he had to respect it. He approached me. He sat down in the chair across from mine, and for a moment I saw the child he had been, the boy who hugged me when he was scared, the boy who told me he loved me, the boy who promised to always take care of me. But that child no longer existed. The man in front of me was someone else, a person I no longer recognized. "Mum, you don't understand. We really need that money. We have debts, we have problems, and you have so much saved up. It wouldn't cost you anything to help us." It wouldn't cost me anything. Those words cut through me, because they revealed that he had no idea. He had no idea how much every dollar of that money had cost me. He had no idea how many years I had worked, how many nights I had cried from exhaustion, how many times I had sacrificed my own dreams for his. I told him that money was mine, that I had earned it, that I had decided to save it for my old age, to have security, to not depend on anyone, and that I wasn't going to spend it on unnecessary things just because he and his wife didn't know how to manage their own money. He stood up. His expression changed. It became hard, cold. He looked at me in a way he had never looked at me before, and said something that broke my heart. "Well then, I hope that money keeps you company when you're alone, because we are not going to be here forever." He went to his room and slammed the door. I stayed there sitting, with my hands trembling, with my heart racing. But I didn't cry. I didn't break down, because I knew I had done the right thing. That night, I went to bed early. I locked my door, and I slept better than I had slept in weeks. Because for the first time in a long time, I was in control. I had made the decisions. I had protected myself. And if they wanted to keep trying, they were going to discover that a 64-year-old woman can be much smarter than they imagined. Because respect is not begged for. It is earned. And when someone loses it, no matter how much love you felt for that person, you have to know how to defend yourself, even if that person is your own son. The following days were tense. The house was filled with a heavy silence. One of those silences that hurt more than words. Robert and Brenda barely spoke to me. When I entered a room, they left. When I made food, they ate in their room. It was like living with ghosts, ghosts full of resentment. But I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to apologize for protecting what was mine. I wasn't going to beg them to talk to me. If they had decided to treat me like this, just because I wouldn't give them my money, then I had made the right decision. Because that confirmed it was never about love. It was always about interest. One afternoon, while I was watering the patio plants, I heard the house phone ring. It was an old phone that I kept because I liked it, because it reminded me of simpler times. I answered. It was a woman's voice I didn't know. "Good morning. I'm calling from Central Bank. We are trying to verify a recent transaction on your account. We need you to confirm some details." I told her I hadn't made any recent transactions. The woman insisted. She said a charge of $500 appeared at an appliance store, that they needed to verify it was me. I told her it definitely wasn't me, that I hadn't bought anything at any store. There was a silence on the other end. Then the woman asked me for my card number to verify, and that's when I knew something was wrong. Because the bank never asks for your card number over the phone. I told her I wasn't going to give that information, that if there was a problem, I would go to the bank in person. The woman insisted. Her voice became more urgent, more nervous. She said it was important, that I could be getting robbed, that I needed to act fast. But I had already figured it out. This was not a call from the bank. It was an attempted scam, and I suspected who was behind it. I hung up the phone without saying anything else. I stood there with my heart racing. I walked toward Robert and Brenda's room. The door was closed, but I could hear voices inside. Voices whispering, voices sounding frustrated. I knocked on the door. The silence was immediate. Then I heard footsteps. Brenda opened it. She looked at me with a neutral expression, almost bored, as if I were a nuisance. "What do you want, mother-in-law?" I asked her if she had been the one who had called pretending to be the bank. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something in her eyes. A flicker, a silent confirmation. She shook her head and told me she didn't know what I was talking about, that I was making things up, that perhaps I was confused. Confused. That word again. As if I were a crazy old woman who couldn't distinguish reality. As if my mind was failing. As if they could manipulate me with that narrative. I told her I knew perfectly well what was going on, that I wasn't a fool, that I wasn't going to fall for their tricks. Brenda smiled. It was a cold smile, a joyless smile, and she said something that chilled my blood. You are the one making this difficult. We just want to help you, but you won't let us. One day you're going to be alone, and you'll regret treating us this way. She closed the door in my face. I stood there, feeling the anger rise in my chest. But I didn't knock on the door. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just took a deep breath and went to my room. Because I knew that reacting was giving them power, and I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. That night I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from alertness. I felt something was going to happen, that they were planning something else. And I wasn't wrong. Around 1 a.m, I heard noises, soft noises, like someone walking barefoot in the hallway. I stayed still in my bed, with my eyes open in the darkness, listening. The footsteps stopped in front of my door. I saw the shadow of someone on the other side. I saw them trying to turn the knob, but it was locked. I always locked it since that early morning when I heard them planning to rob me. I heard a sigh of frustration, and then the footsteps moved away. The next day, when they left the house, I checked my room. I looked to see if anything was missing, if anything had been moved. And then I saw it. My jewelry box was in a different place. Someone had touched it. Someone had looked through it. I opened it and counted the few jewels I had. They were all there. But I knew they weren't looking for jewels. They were looking for papers. They were looking for information. They were looking for a way to access my money. I took all my important documents, the new bank statements the bank had given me, the condo papers, my will, my backup ID, everything. I put it in a cloth bag and left the house. I walked 3 blocks to my friend Louise's house. Louise and I had known each other for more than 30 years. We had raised our children together. We had shared sorrows and joys. She knew everything about my situation. I had told her everything from the beginning, and she was the only person I trusted completely. When she opened the door and saw me with the bag in my hands, she immediately knew what was happening. She let me in. She made me tea. She sat me down in her living room, and she listened without interrupting as I told her everything. The fake call, the footsteps in the night, the moved jewelry box. Everything. Louise shook her head. There were tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe Robert was capable of this. She had watched him grow up. She remembered him as a good boy, as a hard-working young man. What had happened to him? How had he changed so much? I told her I didn't know, that maybe he had always been this way and I hadn't wanted to see it. Or maybe Brenda had changed him. Or maybe money brings out the worst in people. It didn't matter anymore. The important thing was to protect myself. I asked her to keep those documents, to hide them in a safe place in her house, to not tell anyone she had them. She accepted without hesitation. She took the bag and put it in a drawer in her room. Then she hugged me. It was a long hug, a hug I needed, a hug that reminded me I wasn't alone, that there were still people who truly loved me. When I returned home, Robert and Brenda had already returned. They were in the living room. When they saw me come in, Robert stood up. His expression was serious, dark. He approached me and asked me where I had been. I told him I had gone to visit Louise. He asked me why. I told him because she was my friend and I could visit her whenever I wanted. He insisted. He asked me if I had taken anything with me, if I had taken anything out of the house. I felt the air grow denser. Brenda had also stood up. They were both looking at me, waiting for my answer, looking for a sign, some confirmation of their suspicions. I told them I hadn't taken anything, that I had just gone to have tea with my friend. Robert didn't believe me. I could see it on his face. He walked toward my room, I followed him. I watched him enter and start searching. He opened my closet. He checked my drawers. He looked under my bed. He searched everywhere. I asked him what he was looking for. He didn't answer me. He kept searching. Brenda joined him. Between the two of them, they searched every corner of my room. And I let them. I let them do it. Because I knew they wouldn't find anything. Because everything important was safe, away from their hands. When they finished searching, Robert looked at me with rage, with frustration. He knew I had moved something. He knew I had acted. But he couldn't prove it. He couldn't do anything, and that was driving him crazy. "Where are the condo papers, Mum?" I told him they were stored in a safe place, that they were none of his business. That condo was mine, and would remain mine, that I wasn't going to hand over anything to him, that if he wanted something, he would have to earn it himself, like I had. He approached me. He stood face to face with me, and for a moment I thought he was going to yell at me, that he was going to lose control. But he didn't. He just looked at me with a coldness that broke my heart, and he said something I will never forget. "You're going to regret this, Mum. You're going to be alone, and when you need help, I won't be there." I told him I preferred to be alone than to be surrounded by people who only wanted me for my money, that if that was his decision, he could leave whenever he wanted, that the door was open. He left my room in a fury. Brenda followed him. I heard them arguing in their bedroom. I heard doors slamming. I heard harsh words. I heard how the plan they had built so carefully was collapsing in front of them. And I sat on my bed, with my hands still trembling, but with my head held high. Because I had won this battle. I had protected what was mine. I had shown that I was not a weak old woman they could easily trick. But I knew this wasn't over. I knew they wouldn't give up so easily. I knew they would try something else, something more desperate, something more dangerous, and I had to be ready. I had to be alert. Because the war was just beginning. The days dragged by like open wounds. Robert and Brenda no longer tried to hide their hostility. They looked at me with contempt. They talked about me as if I weren't present, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the house, an annoyance they had to endure until they found a way to get rid of me. But I remained firm. I remained alert. I continued protecting what was mine. One morning, while making coffee, I heard Brenda talking on the phone in the living room. She spoke in a low voice, but I could hear some words. She was talking to someone about me. She said I was becoming difficult, that I was no longer reasonable, that maybe I was losing my mind, that they needed to act soon before it was too late. Act soon. Those words put me on high alert. What were they planning now? How far were they willing to go? That afternoon, I decided to leave the house. I needed fresh air. I needed to think clearly away from those hate-filled looks. I walked to the local park. I sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. I watched the pigeons. I watched the children play. I watched life pass in front of me. A simple life. A life that I had worked so hard to have, and that they were now trying to take away from me. When I returned home, something was wrong. I felt it as soon as I crossed the threshold. The atmosphere was different, more tense, more charged. Robert was in the living room with another man, a man I didn't know. He wore a suit. He carried a briefcase. He had that look of people who work with papers, with documents, with legal matters. Robert saw me come in and smiled. It was a strange smile, a smile I didn't like at all. He introduced me to the man. He said he was Mr. Jones, a lawyer, and that he had come to help us with some important paperwork. What paperwork? I asked him. Robert asked me to sit down, that we needed to talk. that it was important. I didn't sit down. I stayed standing, with my purse still in my hand, ready to run if necessary. Mr. Jones took some documents out of his briefcase. He explained that Robert had contacted him because he was worried about me, because he had noticed that I was having memory problems, that I was easily confused, that I forgot things, that perhaps I needed help managing my affairs. I felt my blood boil. This was a trap to have me declared incompetent, to take control of my money, so Robert could take charge of everything, to legally rob me. I told the lawyer that I was perfectly fine, that my memory worked perfectly, that I didn't need anyone to manage my affairs, that I could do everything myself. The lawyer nodded and told me it was just a precaution, that it was normal at my age, that many people did it. Robert intervened. He said he just wanted to help me, that he didn't want me to be scammed, that he didn't want me to lose my money due to some mistake, that if I gave him legal power over my accounts, he would take care of everything. I would only have to worry about resting, about enjoying my final years. My final years. As if I were already on the verge of the grave, as if I no longer had time left, as if what I wanted no longer mattered. I told them no, that I wasn't going to sign anything, that I wasn't going to give power over anything to anyone, that my affairs were mine and mine alone. The lawyer looked at me with a serious expression. He told me he understood my position, but that I should think things through, that sometimes pride makes us make bad decisions. I told him to leave my house, that there was nothing more to talk about, that I wasn't going to sign any document. Robert stood up. He tried to calm me down. He tried to convince me, but I was already walking toward the door. I opened the door for the lawyer and asked him to leave. Mr. Jones put away his papers. He gave me his card in case I changed my mind. And he left. When the door closed, Robert exploded. He yelled at me that I was being stubborn, that I was being irrational, that he only wanted to help me, that I didn't understand anything. I yelled back. I told him I did understand, that I understood perfectly that he only wanted my money, that all of this was a plan to rob me, that I wasn't a fool, that I knew exactly what was going on. Brenda appeared from the kitchen. She stood next to Robert. They both looked at me with a mixture of rage and frustration, and then Brenda said something that confirmed all my suspicions. "You can't take care of yourself. You are old. You need help. And we are your family. We have the right to know what you have. We have the right to protect you." Right. That word again. As if sharing blood gave them the right over my life, over my money, over my decisions. I told them they had no right over anything of mine, that I was the owner of my life, that as long as I was conscious and sane, no one was going to decide for me. I went to my room and locked the door. I heard them arguing outside. I heard Robert hitting the wall in frustration. I heard Brenda saying they had to do something now, that they couldn't wait any longer, that every day that passed I became more difficult to control. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, sitting in my bed, listening to every noise in the house, waiting, alert, because I knew something was going to happen. I felt it in the air, in the heavy silence, in the tension that filled every corner. And I wasn't wrong. Around 2 a.m, I heard voices again, the same whispering voices I had heard that first night, the voices that had started everything. I got up slowly from the bed. I walked to the door. I put my ear to the wood. It was Brenda. She was talking on the phone with someone. She was talking fast, nervous, desperate. She said that things weren't going as planned, that I was smarter than they thought, that I had moved the money, that I had hidden the papers, that they needed help. The other person on the phone must have been giving her instructions, because Brenda was only listening and nodding. Then she said something that chilled my blood. "Yes, I understand. Tomorrow we'll go to the bank. We'll try with the old account. If she changed everything, we'll look for another way. But it has to work. We can't keep waiting." There was a pause. Then I heard Robert's voice. He was with her, speaking in whispers. He said maybe they should try to get a copy of my ID. That with that and my date of birth, they might be able to answer the bank's security questions. That it was worth a try. Brenda agreed. She said they would check my things again, that they would look for any information they could use, that this time they wouldn't fail. And then she said something else. Something that made me understand the danger was more real than I had imagined. And if none of that works, we'll have to convince a judge that she's not well. Mr. Jones said that with our testimonies and a medical examination, we could get guardianship. And then everything would be ours. Guardianship. They wanted to have me legally declared incompetent. They wanted to take away all my rights. They wanted to turn me into a prisoner in my own life, and then take everything. My money, my house, my dignity, everything. I moved away from the door. I went back to my bed. I sat in the darkness, and for the first time in all this time, I felt fear, real fear, because I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my freedom. It was about my life. But along with the fear came something else. Rage came. Determination came. The absolute certainty that I was not going to let this happen. I was not going to let them take what I had built. I was not going to let them lock me up like a madwoman just because they wanted my money. Because I was Grace Miller. And I had survived worse things than this. I had survived poverty. I had survived raising a son alone. I had survived the death of my husband. I had survived 64 years in this cruel world. And I wasn't going to let my own son destroy me. When the sun began to rise, I already knew what I had to do. I already had a plan that would put an end to all of this once and for all. A plan that would show them they had underestimated the wrong person. Because they believed I was an easy victim, a scared, lonely old woman. But they were about to discover that this old woman had more strength than they ever imagined, and that when a woman decides to defend herself, no trap works. No lie stops her. No betrayal destroys her. There is only justice, a silent but relentless justice, a justice that would arrive sooner than they expected. That morning I woke up with a calm I didn't expect myself. It wasn't the calm of resignation. It was the calm of someone who knows exactly what she's going to do, of someone who has made a decision and no longer has doubts. I dressed slowly. I combed my hair in front of the mirror. I looked myself in the eyes and saw the woman I really was. A woman who wasn't going to give up. A woman who was going to fight until the end. I left my room and went straight to the kitchen. Robert and Brenda were already there. They were having breakfast in silence. When they saw me come in, they exchanged a look loaded with intention. I knew what they were going to do. I knew that today was the day they would try to execute their plan. I made them coffee. I acted normally, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't heard them the night before, planning to destroy my life. Brenda wished me good morning with a fake smile. Robert barely looked at me. He had that tense expression of someone who is about to do something he knows is wrong. We had breakfast in silence. I ate my toast calmly. I drank my coffee slowly. I enjoyed every sip, because I knew that when this day ended, nothing would ever be the same. Because I knew this was the last time we were going to sit together as a family. Although we were no longer a family. That had broken a long time ago. When I finished breakfast, I got up and washed my cup. Robert also stood up. He told me that he and Brenda had to go out, that they had to run some errands, that they would be back in a few hours. I just nodded. I didn't ask anything. I didn't say anything. I just watched them leave. But I knew where they were going. They were going to the bank. They were going to try to take my money. They were going to try to access my account with whatever information they had gotten. They were going to try to convince someone that they had the right to my money. I waited 10 minutes after they left. Then I picked up my phone and called the bank. I asked to speak with Mr. Harrison. They told me they would transfer me. When I heard his voice, I breathed a sigh of relief. Mr. Harrison, this is Grace Miller. I'm calling because I believe my son is going to try to access my account today. I want you to be alert. I want you to call me immediately if he shows up there asking about my money. And I want you not to give him any information. Mr. Harrison told me he understood, that he would make a note of my call, that if someone tried to access my account without my authorization, he would activate the security protocol, that I shouldn't worry, that my money was protected. I hung up the phone and sat down to wait. Time passed slowly. Every minute felt like an hour. I looked at the clock. I looked out the window. I waited, because I knew the call would come. I knew Robert would try something, and I knew that when he did, everything would collapse for them. 40 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Miller, your son is here. He is trying to access your account. He says you gave him permission. He says you are sick, and that he needs to take out money to pay for your medication. Is this true? I told him no, that I wasn't sick, that I hadn't given him any permission, that he was lying, that he should please activate the security protocol and not allow him to touch any of my money. Mr. Harrison told me he would do so. He told me Robert was insisting a lot, that he was getting aggressive, that he was going to have to call security if he didn't calm down. I told him to do what he had to do, to protect my account, that it was my money and no one but me had the right to touch it. I hung up the phone with my hands shaking, not from fear, from rage, from indignation. My own son was at the bank right now trying to steal from me, lying about me, saying I was sick, using my supposed illness as an excuse to take everything from me. I sat on the sofa to wait. I didn't know how long it would be before they returned, but I knew that when they did, everything would explode. And I was ready, more than ready. I was prepared to confront them, to tell them everything I had saved up, to end this farce once and for all. 2 hours later, I heard the door open. I heard furious footsteps entering the house. I heard Brenda's voice cursing. I heard Robert breathing heavily. They entered the living room and saw me there, sitting, calm, waiting for them. Robert stood in front of me. His face was red. His hands were trembling. He had that expression of someone who has just been humiliated, of someone whose plan failed miserably. What did you do, Mum? Why did you tell the bank not to give me access? I'm your son. I have the right. I stood up. I looked him straight in the eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel love when I looked at him. I only felt disappointment, sadness, and a coldness that I didn't even recognize in myself. You have no right. That money is mine. I earned it. With my work. With my effort, with my sacrifices. And you have no right to touch it. Much less by lying. Much less by saying I'm sick. Brenda stepped forward. She shouted that I was selfish, that they had taken care of me, that they had been there for me, that I owed them. I laughed. It was a bitter laugh, a joyless laugh. You've taken care of me. You moved in here because you had nowhere to live, because you couldn't pay your own rent. I opened the doors of my house to you. I gave you shelter. I gave you food. and all you have done is plan how to rob me, how to take everything I have, how to declare me incompetent to keep my money." The silence that followed was heavy. Robert opened his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Brenda turned pale. They knew I knew everything. They knew I had heard them. They knew their plan was over. "I heard you last night. I heard every word. I heard how you planned to go to the bank, how you planned to get my ID, how you planned to have me declared incompetent. I heard everything, and I took steps. I changed all my passwords. I moved my money. I hid my documents. I did everything necessary to protect myself. From you, from my own blood." Robert took a step toward me. His expression was pure rage, of frustration, of someone who has just lost everything. "You don't understand anything. We need that money. We have debts. We have problems. And you have so much saved up doing nothing with it. What do you want it for? To take it to the grave?" My voice came out cold, colder than I expected. It came out with a frightening calm. "I want it to live, to have security, to not depend on anyone, and especially not to depend on a son who only sees me as a source of money. A son who is willing to declare me crazy to rob me. A son who has betrayed me in the worst possible way." I walked toward the front door. I opened it wide. I turned back to them and said the words I had been holding on to for weeks, the words I had to say, the words that would change everything. "I want you to leave. I want you to get out of my house, now, both of you, and I don't want to see you ever again." Brenda yelled that I couldn't do that they lived here, that they had rights. I told her that this house was in my name, that I was the owner, that I decided who lived here and who didn't, and that they were no longer welcome. Robert looked at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of hatred and pain, of rage and sadness. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg. But Brenda took him by the arm and pulled him toward their room. I heard them packing. I heard drawers opening and closing. I heard suitcases dragging. I heard voices arguing. Brenda told Robert that I would regret it, that someday I would need them and they wouldn't be there. Robert didn't say anything. He just packed in silence. Half an hour later, they came out of the room with their suitcases. They walked past me without looking. Robert stopped at the door. He turned toward me, and for a moment I saw the child he had been, the child who hugged me, the child who told me he loved me. But that child no longer existed. "Goodbye, Mum." I didn't answer. I just held the door open. I watched him leave. I watched Brenda leave behind him. I watched them load their suitcases into the car. I watched them drive away down the street. And when I couldn't see them anymore, I closed the door. I stood there, in the silence of my house, in the emptiness they had left. And then, only then, the tears came. I cried. I cried for the son I had lost. I cried for the years I had dedicated to raising him. I cried for the love I had given him and which he had scorned. I cried for everything that could have been and never would be. But I also cried with relief, because the war was over, because I had won, because I had protected what was mine, because I had had the courage to do what I had to do. I wiped my tears. I took a deep breath, and I walked through my house, empty but mine, silent but at peace, and for the first time in months, I felt free. The first few days after they left were strange. The house felt different, bigger, more silent. But it wasn't a heavy silence like before. It was a clean silence, a silence that allowed me to breathe. a silence that was mine. I woke up that first morning alone and for a moment forgot what had happened. I expected to hear Robert's footsteps in the hallway. I expected to hear Brenda's voice complaining about something. But I didn't hear anything. Only the birds singing outside my window. Only the sound of the wind moving the curtains. Only peace. I got up slowly. I made my coffee. This time I didn't have to make it for 3, just for me. I sat in my spot by the window and watched the sun stream through the glass. And I realized something. I had forgotten what it felt like to be at peace in my own house. I had forgotten what it was like not to have to be on alert all the time. I had forgotten what it was like to live without fear. Louise came to visit me that afternoon. She knocked on the door with her characteristic knock. 3 gentle taps. When I opened it, she hugged me without saying anything. She just hugged me. And that hug told me everything I needed to know, that she understood, that she was there, that I wasn't alone. We sat in the living room with hot tea. I told her everything, how it had ended, how I had confronted them, how I had asked them to leave, how they had left my house with their suitcases and their rage. Louise listened without interrupting. When I finished talking, she sighed deeply. "You did the right thing, Grace. I know it hurts. I know he's your son. But you couldn't let them destroy you. You couldn't let them take your dignity, your peace, your life." I told her I knew, that in my mind I knew I had done the right thing, but that my heart still hurt. Because no matter how much someone betrays you, when it's your son, the love doesn't disappear so easily. It stays there. It hurts. It bleeds. But it stays. Louise took my hands. She looked me in the eyes, and she said something I needed to hear. "A mother's love is not blind, Grace. It's brave. And sometimes being brave means knowing when to walk away, when to say enough, when to protect yourself. Because you can't take care of anyone if you don't take care of yourself first." Those words made me cry again. But this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of liberation, of acceptance, of understanding that I had done what I had to do, and that it was okay to feel pain about it. It was okay to miss my son. It was okay to wish things had been different. But it was also okay to have let him go. The days passed. I slowly started to reorganize my life. I cleaned the room that Robert and Brenda had used. I washed the sheets. I opened the windows. I let the fresh air in. And while I was cleaning, I found things they had left behind. A magazine, a pen, a crumpled note, small traces of their presence that were still there. I put everything in a box. I didn't throw it away. I couldn't, because despite everything, he was still my son. And maybe someday, if he changed, if he understood, if he truly apologized, maybe we could talk. Maybe we could heal. But that day wasn't today. Today I needed to heal alone. I needed to recover. I needed to remember who I was before all of this. One afternoon I received a call. It was from a number I didn't know. I hesitated to answer, but something made me pick up. It was Robert. His voice sounded different, more sober, more tired. He told me he needed to talk to me, that he had been thinking, that maybe he had made mistakes. I told him maybe it wasn't the time, that I was still processing everything, that I needed time. He insisted. He said he just wanted me to know something, that Brenda and he had separated, that she had left, that when he told her they didn't have the money she expected, when she understood that I wasn't going to give them anything, she simply left. She abandoned him. And he realized something, that she had never loved him. She had only loved the idea of what he could give her. I remained silent. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him I had warned him, that I had seen who Brenda was from the beginning, but I didn't, because he was already suffering enough, and because the pain was no longer useful. I asked him where he was living. He told me in a rented room, that he was working in a warehouse, that he was trying to pay his debts, that he was trying to rebuild his life. I told him I was glad, that I hoped he succeeded, and then I said something I needed to say. Robert, I love you. I will always love you because you are my son. But what you tried to do to me was unforgivable. You hurt me in a way I never imagined possible. And I need time to heal. I need time for myself. So please, don't call me for a while. When I'm ready, if I'm ever ready, I will call you. There was silence on the other end. Then I heard his voice crack. I'm sorry, Mum. I really am sorry. I hung up the phone, and I cried again. But this time the tears were different. They were tears of closure, of understanding that maybe, someday, we could heal. But that day wasn't today. Today, I needed to focus on myself. I started doing things I had stopped doing. I went back to sewing. I took my old machine out of the closet and put it on the dining table. I bought colourful fabrics. I started making tablecloths, cushions, small things that made me happy. Things I had stopped doing because I was always busy taking care of others. Taking care of Robert. Taking care of the house. Taking care of everything but myself. Louise invited me to join her knitting group, a group of women our age who met on Tuesdays at the senior centre in the community centre. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to socialise, to tell my story, but Louise insisted. She told me it would do me good to be surrounded by other women, by other stories, by other lives. I went to the first meeting nervously, but when I arrived, I found something I didn't expect. I found women like me, women who had lived long lives, women who had suffered, women who had been betrayed, women who had had to make difficult decisions, and women who, despite everything, kept going. One of them, Clara, told me her story. Her daughter had left her in a nursing home and never came back to visit her. Clara had managed to get out of there, recover her apartment, and now lived alone, but happy. Another woman, Eleanor, told me how her husband had tried to leave her with nothing when they got divorced. But she had fought. She had gone to court. And she had won. Hearing those stories made me feel less alone. It made me understand that what I had lived through was not unique, that many women our age face betrayal, face abuse, face attempts to take what is theirs, but that many of us also fight. We defend ourselves, and we move forward. I started going every Tuesday. I started knitting with them, sharing coffee, laughing, telling stories. And little by little, without realizing it, I started to heal. I started to remember who I was. Not just Robert's mother, not just the wife I had been, but Grace, a woman with her own life, with her own dreams, with her own worth. One day, while walking back from the community centre, I passed a bookstore. There was a sign in the window announcing painting classes for older adults. I stood looking at the sign for a long time. I remembered that when I was young, before I got married, before I had Robert, I had dreamed of being a painter. But life had taken another path, and that dream had remained tucked away in a corner of my heart. I entered the bookstore. I asked about the classes. The girl at the counter smiled and gave me all the information. The classes were on Thursday afternoons. The cost was affordable, and no prior experience was needed. Just a desire to learn, just a desire to create. I signed up that same day, and the following Thursday I went to my first class. There were 10 other people, all older, all with stories, all looking for something new, something to make them feel alive. The professor taught us the basics: how to mix colors, how to hold the brush, how to see the world in a different way. I painted my first work that afternoon. It was simple: a tree, a sky, a path. Nothing special. But when I finished it and saw it there in front of me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt pride. I felt joy. I felt that I was creating something, that I was doing something just for myself, without obligations, without expectations, just because I wanted to. I hung that painting in my living room when I got home. I put it where there had once been a family photo of Robert, Brenda, and me. The photo that was now stored in a drawer. The painting occupied that space. And every time I saw it, it reminded me that I was building a new life, a life that was mine, a life that no one could take from me. Weeks passed and I realized something. I no longer thought about Robert all the time. I no longer woke up with that weight in my chest. I no longer felt that constant sadness. It still hurt. I still missed the son who could have been, but the pain no longer consumed me. It no longer defined me. I had chosen peace. I had chosen my dignity. I had chosen to live. 3 months had passed since Robert and Brenda left my house. 3 months in which my life had completely changed. I no longer lived in fear. I no longer lived in constant alert. I lived in peace, a peace that I had built myself, a peace that no one could take from me. It was a Saturday morning. I had gone out early to buy fresh flowers for the house. I liked having flowers in every room. They reminded me that life goes on, that beauty exists, that it's worth getting up every day. As I walked back with my flowers, I saw him. Robert was standing on the corner of my street. He seemed to have lost weight. He had dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired, older than he really was. When our eyes met, he raised his hand timidly, as if wanting to say hello, as if wanting to approach. I just kept walking. I didn't run. I didn't change direction. I just kept on my way. I walked past him without stopping, without speaking, without looking back. Because I wasn't ready yet. Because forgiveness is not rushed. Because healing takes time. I heard him call me. Mum. That word that used to fill me with love now only brought painful memories. I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept going toward my house, toward my refuge, toward my peace. When I arrived, I closed the door behind me. I put the flowers in water. I made coffee. I sat on my sofa. And I breathed easy. Because I had made the right decision. Because I didn't owe anyone anything, not even my son. Because I had learned something fundamental in these months. That self-love is not selfishness. It is survival. That afternoon, Louise came to visit me as she always did on Saturdays. I told her I had seen Robert, that he had tried to talk to me, that I had kept walking. She nodded with understanding. And how did you feel? I told her the truth, that I had felt sadness, that it still hurt, that maybe it would always hurt, but that I had also felt something else. I had felt firmness. I had felt certainty that I was doing the right thing, that I wasn't ready to forgive, and that maybe I never would be. And that was okay. That I had the right to protect my peace, to protect my heart, to protect myself. Louise smiled. She told me she was proud of me, that I had traveled a difficult path, that I had made decisions that few women dare to make, that I had chosen my dignity over misunderstood love, over the guilt that society places on mothers, over everything. That night I made my favorite dinner: turkey and mashed potatoes, warm rolls. I ate slowly, enjoying every bite, looking out the window at the sunset, thinking about everything that had happened, about everything I had lost, but also about everything I had gained. I had gained my freedom. I had gained my peace. I had gained the right to live my life as I wanted, without manipulation, without lies, without betrayals. I had gained something that many people never find. I had gained myself. The following days, I continued with my routine, my painting classes on Thursdays, my knitting group on Tuesdays, my morning walks, my coffees with Louise, my simple but my own life, my quiet but full life, my life without drama, but full of small joys. One afternoon, while painting in my class, the professor stopped in front of my easel. He looked at my work. It was a landscape, a path that was lost on the horizon, a sky full of colours, a solitary but strong tree in the middle of the field. It's beautiful. Grace. There is something in this painting that conveys strength. Solitude. Yes. But also freedom. As if the tree had chosen to be alone. As if that solitude were an act of bravery. I smiled. Because he had understood. Because that was exactly what I had wanted to paint. My own story. My own path. My own freedom. The months continued to pass. The pain became smaller, more manageable. I still thought about Robert. I still wondered how he was. I still wished things had been different. But it no longer consumed me. It no longer stole my sleep. It no longer stole my peace. I had learned to live with that scar, because scars don't disappear. They just become part of you. They remind you where you come from. They remind you what you survived. They remind you that you are stronger than you thought. One morning, while drinking my coffee by the window, I saw a bird building its nest in the garden tree. I watched it work for days, bringing twigs, arranging them carefully, building its home with patience, with dedication, with self-love. And I understood that was exactly what I was doing. I was rebuilding my nest. I was creating a new home, not the home I had before. That one no longer existed. But a new home, a home where I was the priority, where my peace was the most important thing, where my happiness didn't depend on anyone but myself. I opened my notebook and wrote down something I had been feeling but hadn't been able to express in words. I wrote about forgiveness, about how forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean returning. It doesn't mean allowing yourself to be hurt again. It means letting go. It means releasing the weight. It means choosing your peace over revenge. It means moving forward without resentment, but also without naivety. I wrote about mothers, about how they teach us to give everything, to sacrifice ourselves always, to put everyone before ourselves, but about how no one teaches us to know when to stop, when to say no, when to walk away, when to save ourselves. I wrote about old age, about how society wants us to believe we are useless, that we are no longer needed, that we are just in the way, but about how old age is actually wisdom. It is strength. It is clarity. It is the moment when you finally understand that your life belongs to you, that it always belonged to you. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. Life continued. And I was here, alive, free, at peace. My bank account was intact. My condo was still in my name. My documents were safe. My dignity was restored. And most importantly, my soul was calm. I had paid a high price for this peace. I had lost my son. I had lost the illusion of having a family. I had lost many things. But I had gained something invaluable. I had gained myself. I had recovered. I had saved myself. And if I had learned anything in these 64 years of life, it was this: that justice doesn't always come with judges or police. Sometimes it comes in the form of inner peace. It comes in the form of nights where you can sleep soundly. It comes in the form of mornings where you wake up without fear. It comes in the form of a life that is finally yours. I took the last sip of my coffee. I smiled, looking at the horizon, and whispered to myself the words that had become my mantra: my truth, my freedom. $3 remained in that decoy account, and no guilt remained in my conscience. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, and I gave thanks. I gave thanks for the strength I found when I needed it most. I gave thanks for the courage to choose myself. I gave thanks for this second chance to live, to truly live, because in the end, that was what mattered. Not how much money you had, not who was by your side, but whether you could look at yourself in the mirror and be at peace with the person you saw. Whether you could sleep soundly knowing you had done the right thing. Whether you could live without fear, without guilt, without regrets. And I could. Finally, after everything, I could.